Billionaire CEO hears Black janitor speak multiple languages. He was buffing the marble floors until the Billionaire CEO heard him speak German, Mandarin, and Spanish like a diplomat. What happened next left the entire building speechless. Most people didn't see the maintenance crew at Colbert Global Industries. Not from cruelty, just conditioning. They worked the evening shift, pushing supply carts, emptying executive trash bins, sanitizing glass conference walls, fading into the corporate landscape like ambient lighting. It was Tuesday evening in downtown Chicago, and the company's marble lobby still hummed with the remnants of the business day. Designer heels clicking against polished stone, associates scrolling on smartphones, negotiating extensions and gripping lattes like lifelines. Charles Colbert, the company's billionaire CEO, was 3 steps from the revolving doors when raised voices stopped him cold. A voice, but not just any voice. Precise, confident, and flowing through a language he hadn't heard since his last board meeting at the company's Munich headquarters, German. It froze him mid-stride, not because it was German, but because of who was speaking it. He turned sharply, expecting perhaps one of the international acquisitions team working late, but then he saw him. A black man in a royal blue maintenance uniform, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, holding a spray bottle in one hand and a microfiber cloth in the other. He stood near the main reception desk, mid-conversation with a red-faced contractor in a wool coat and wire-rimmed glasses, who looked equal parts frustrated and relieved. The man in blue was speaking calmly, his voice steady and measured, explaining something about delivery protocols and loading dock schedules, with the kind of fluency that required years, not apps. Colbert's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd seen him before, passing through these same halls during late-night strategy sessions, always nodding politely, always stepping aside, never holding eye contact unless directly addressed. He didn't even know the man's name. But here he was, negotiating a logistics dispute in flawless German while holding cleaning supplies. Colbert took a slow step closer, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. As he approached, the man in blue wrapped up the German conversation, the contractor shaking his hand gratefully, and turned toward a woman in business attire, holding a tablet and looking lost. He switched languages without pause, his Mandarin rolling out smooth and natural as he pointed toward the elevator bank and explained which floor she needed. The woman's shoulders dropped with relief. "Xie," she said, bowing slightly. Then, just as effortlessly, he pivoted toward a delivery driver standing near a stack of boxes, confusion written across his face. The man in blue smiled slightly and spoke in rapid colloquial Spanish, something about a redirected shipment and the correct entrance on the west side. "Ah, perfecto, gracias, hermano," the driver said, grinning. Colbert felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger, something sharper, something closer to shame. He'd built an empire on global expansion, led acquisitions across 4 continents, hired cultural consultants, and spent millions on translation services and international training programs. Yet here, in his own building, the most linguistically gifted person he'd encountered in years had been cleaning executive bathrooms on the 14th floor. He stepped forward, more curious than commanding. "Excuse me." The man turned toward him, startled for just a fraction of a second before his face settled into professional composure. "Yes, sir?" His voice was respectful, but not deferential, steady. Colbert studied him. Early 30s maybe, mid, with sharp, observant eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that came from competence, not arrogance. "John," he said finally, "I'm going to be honest. I didn't expect to have this conversation tonight." The conversation in Colbert's office lasted 20 minutes, but it stuck with him for 3 days straight. John had answered his questions with a kind of careful honesty that felt both guarded and genuine. "Where did you learn the languages?" "Books, mostly, audio programs, the internet. University before I left. Why did you leave? Family situation. Had to come home. Do you still study? Every day, sir. Every single day. That last answer haunted Colbert more than the others. Every single day. A man working 8-hour shifts, scrubbing floors, was still disciplining himself to study languages in whatever time remained. That wasn't survival. That was something else entirely. Something Colbert recognized because he'd once had it himself, back when he was nobody, back when hunger was the only credential that mattered. By Thursday morning, he'd made up his mind. He needed to know more. Not the polished version people put on resumes, but the real story, the kind you don't find in HR files. He started with the employee database. John Michael Phillips, hired March 2017, evening maintenance crew. Perfect attendance record, not a single write-up. 3 commendations for going above and beyond. Twice for helping elderly visitors find their way through the building, once for staying late to clean up after a plumbing emergency on the 9th floor. His supervisor's notes were consistent, reliable, professional, keeps to himself. But that was just data. Colbert wanted context. He called Martha in HR, kept it casual. Hey, I need you to pull some background info on one of our maintenance staff. John Phillips, evening shift. Educational history if we have it. Martha hesitated. Is there a problem, Mr. Colbert? No problem, just doing some talent assessment work. Confidential for now. 2 hours later, his phone buzzed. Martha's email was brief, but the attachment wasn't. Colbert opened it and felt his stomach drop. Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, International Relations major, Dean's List every semester, fluent in German, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, Rhodes Scholar nominee, accepted into the graduate program with full funding, thesis topic, cross-cultural negotiation strategies in multilateral trade agreements, withdrew spring semester 2016, 3 weeks before graduation, no degree conferred. Colbert read it twice, then a third time. 3 weeks before graduation, he'd been that close. Rhodes Scholar nominee didn't just happen. That was top 1% territory. That was the kind of student professors wrote recommendation letters about at 2 a.m. because they believed in them that much. And then, nothing. Just a sudden withdrawal with no explanation in the file. Colbert leaned back in his chair, staring at the Chicago skyline without really seeing it. What kind of emergency pulls someone out of Georgetown 3 weeks before finishing? Family situation, John had said. Colbert had heard enough euphemisms in his career to know that phrase could mean anything from illness to incarceration to something worse. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then dialed his head of security. Dave, I need a favor. Completely off the books, completely confidential. Can you do that? Of course, sir. John Phillips, evening shift. I need to know why he left Georgetown in 2016. Medical records, obituaries, court filings if necessary. I'm not looking to invade his privacy. I just need context. And Dave, if this gets out, we're both finished. Clear? Crystal, sir. By Friday afternoon, Dave walked into Colbert's office and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. He just placed a thin folder on the desk and said, "You're not going to like this, but you need to see it." Colbert opened it. The first document was a death certificate. Marcus Wendell Phillips, age 58. Cause of death, acute myocardial infarction. Date, April 3, 2016. The second document was a custody filing. John Michael Phillips, age 27, petitioning for guardianship of 3 minor siblings, Marcus Jr., age 17, Angela, age 16, Keisha, age 14. Mother, deceased 2011. Reason for petition, father's sudden death, no other living relatives, minors at risk entering foster system. Petition granted. Colbert closed the folder slowly. He sat there for a long time, the weight of it settling over him like a heavy coat. John Phillips hadn't failed, he hadn't quit, he'd sacrificed everything. walked away from a Rhodes nomination and a Georgetown degree 3 weeks before the finish line to raise his orphaned siblings. And for 8 years, he'd been invisible in this building. Colbert stood up and walked to the window. Evening was falling over Chicago, and somewhere 23 floors below, John Phillips was probably clocking in for another shift, another night of cleaning up after people who'd never see him. But Colbert saw him now, and he'd just made a decision that was going to confuse the hell out of everyone. The company-wide email hit inboxes Monday morning at 8:47 a.m., and by 9:15, the entire building was losing its collective mind. Effective immediately, I will be spending this week working alongside our evening maintenance crew to better understand operations from every level of this organization. I encourage all leadership to consider similar immersion experiences. Signed, Charles Colbert, CEO. The reactions came fast and varied. In the executive suite, the COO called an emergency meeting to ask if Colbert was having some kind of breakdown. On the 14th floor, a senior VP told her team it was obviously PR spin before a round of layoffs. In the cafeteria, 2 analysts debated whether this was genuine or performative, and one suggested it might be both. Down in maintenance, John's supervisor pulled him aside and said, "I don't know what you did, but the CEO specifically requested to shadow you. Don't screw this up." John didn't respond. He just nodded and tried to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. That evening, at exactly 6 p.m., Charles Colbert walked into the maintenance break room wearing dark jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and work boots that looked suspiciously new. The night crew stared. Someone's radio was playing old-school R&B. Someone else's microwave burrito was burning.
"Evening," Colbert said, like this was completely normal. John stood up from the corner table where he'd been reading a German newspaper. "Mr. Colbert, it's Charles this week, and you're my teacher, so let's get started." The first night was awkward as hell. Colbert tried mopping the lobby and left streaks everywhere. He loaded the cleaning cart backwards and knocked over a bottle of floor polish. He asked questions constantly, some useful, most proving he'd never cleaned anything in his life. But he didn't quit, didn't complain, and by hour 3, he was sweating through his shirt just like everyone else. Around 10:30 p.m., they took a break on the loading dock, the city spread out below them in a grid of lights. Colbert cracked open a bottle of water and sat heavily on a stack of pallets. "I'm 70% sure I threw out my back." John almost smiled. "You'll survive." "People think I'm insane," Colbert said. "My assistant asked if I needed a therapist." "Do you?" "Maybe." Colbert took a long drink. "Or maybe I just needed to see what I've been missing." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Colbert said, "I know about Georgetown." John's jaw tightened. "How? Does it matter?" "Yeah, it does." Colbert turned to face him. "I needed to understand, not to judge, to understand. And now I need to hear it from you." John stared out at the skyline for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "My dad had a heart attack in the kitchen. Massive. Gone before the ambulance arrived. I was 3 weeks from graduation, had my Rhodes interview scheduled, had my whole life mapped out." He paused. "Then I got the call about my siblings, 3 kids, ages 14, 16, and 17. No mom, she died when Keisha was 3. No grandparents, no aunts or uncles who could take them. It was foster care or me." "So you chose them," Colbert said. "It wasn't really a choice. They were my family." John's hands flexed. "I withdrew from school, moved back home, got a job with benefits and hours that let me be there when they needed me. Night shift meant I could get them to school, help with homework, show up to parent-teacher conferences. It meant I could be the person they needed." "And the languages?" "I couldn't let it all go, so I kept studying, little bit every day. Reminded me who I was before everything fell apart." He looked at Colbert. "Reminded me who I might still be someday."
Colbert felt something crack open in his chest. "Your siblings, where are they now?" For the first time, John smiled, really smiled. Marcus Jr.'s teaching 6th grade in Atlanta. Angela just finished nursing school. Keisha's starting law school next fall. You raised 3 kids, kept them together, got them all through college, and you're still here studying 5 languages on night shift. Like I said, little bit every day. Colbert stood up, brushed off his jeans. "John, I didn't come down here to patronize you or make myself feel better. I came because I think this company's been blind, and I think you might be exactly what we need." He extended his hand. "But I want to see the rest first. Show me what else I've been missing." John shook his hand and for the first time in 8 years felt something shift, something that felt dangerously close to hope. By Wednesday night, Colbert's hands were bleeding. Not dramatically, just tiny cuts from the industrial-grade cleaning products, but enough that he couldn't ignore what his body was telling him. He wasn't built for this. Yet here he was, pushing a mop down the 16th floor hallway while John moved methodically through the office spaces, and something in Colbert's chest was shifting that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "You're doing it wrong," John said, not unkindly. "The mop? Your whole approach, you're fighting the floor. You've got to let the water do the work." Colbert adjusted his technique, and John nodded approvingly before disappearing into an office. When he returned, he wasn't alone. He brought a man in his late 50s wearing the same blue uniform, carrying a tablet. "This is Marcus," John said. "He's been here 14 years. Marcus extended a calloused hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Colbert." "Charles, and actually I've been wanting to talk to you about something." Marcus pulled up his tablet and Colbert's eyes widened. The screen displayed architectural schematics, code, flowcharts, professional-grade security infrastructure. "That system upgrade you've heard about? The one that cost $3 million and took 4 contractors 6 months? I redesigned it in 8 weeks. Could have saved you $2 million if anyone had asked." Colbert's throat tightened. "Why didn't you—" "Tell someone? I tried twice. My sister had 3 surgeries last year. Nobody listens to the guy with the mop." By midnight, Colbert had met 5 people who weren't supposed to exist. There was Derek from the loading dock, who'd spent 15 years optimizing supply chain logistics and written a business model that could streamline operations by 40%, a model his supervisor's supervisor had praised, but nobody implemented. Then there was Sophia in the cafeteria, who had an MBA from Northwestern and had restructured their food service to cut costs while improving nutrition, only for her ideas to be shelved because she wasn't in the right department. Then came David, the night security guard, who led Colbert to the break room and, with quiet pride, showed him a published poetry collection sitting on a shelf. 300 copies sold, all through word of mouth. But the thing that broke Colbert open was what John pulled from his backpack in the loading dock at 1:47 p.m. A worn leather notebook, pages crammed with handwriting, names, dates, skills, dreams. Every person he'd quietly documented over 8 years, dozens of entries. Alongside each name, John had written what they could do, what they wanted to do, and why nobody was listening. "Why did you do this?" Colbert asked, his voice barely steady. John looked at the notebook like it was a love letter he'd been holding for someone who'd never asked for it. "Because somebody should remember, because talent doesn't stop being talent just because it's invisible. Because—" he paused. "Because I kept thinking maybe someday someone in power would actually care enough to look." Colbert sat down hard on a pallet. He wasn't just looking at a notebook anymore, he was looking at the architecture of his own blindness. 8 years. His company had been sitting on a gold mine of brilliance, and he'd been too busy with board meetings and shareholder reports to notice. "John," he
he said finally. "We're going to change this." For the first time, John didn't respond with caution. He just nodded, like he'd been waiting for someone to finally catch up.
Thursday night, they ended up in Conference Room C on the 22nd floor. The city sprawled below them like a circuit board of possibility. John spread papers across the mahogany table, ideas he'd been carrying for years, never believing he'd have a place to put them down. "What if we stopped looking up?" John said simply. "What if instead of waiting for talent to announce itself from the top, we actually went looking, ground floor up, not executive down?" Colbert leaned back, already calculating the budget implications, the structural disruption, the board resistance. "That's not how companies work, John." "I know," John said quietly. "That's the problem." Something in that calm acknowledgement made Colbert stop calculating. John began sketching it out: mentorship pathways, skills assessments, tuition assistance, lateral movement across departments, a framework that treated the entire building as a talent pool instead of a hierarchy. "You understand this would completely disrupt everything," Colbert said. John met his eyes. "Good. Some things need disrupting." By 3 a.m., the table was covered in drafts, coffee cups, and the skeleton of something revolutionary. Colbert looked at John across the scattered papers and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not the hunger of ambition, but the electricity of genuine possibility. "Okay," Colbert said finally. "Let's build it." The email announcing the ground floor leadership program went out Friday morning, and by noon, the building had fractured into tribes. In the break rooms, whispers turned into hope. An executive assistant slipped John a handwritten note that made his hands shake. "I have an engineering degree. Thank you for making me believe again." A security guard cornered him at the water cooler, asking if the program was real. A delivery driver wanted to know how to apply. But upstairs, the temperature was different. CFO Richard Mansfield moved like a chess player who'd just seen his opponent's strategy. He called emergency meetings, gathered board allies in his corner office, and systematically reframed the narrative. It's a publicity stunt, a feel-good distraction before layoffs, and frankly, it undermines meritocracy. We promote based on qualifications, not because the CEO felt inspired by a janitor. The word janitor landed like a slap. Middle managers suddenly felt threatened. If people below them could vault upward, what did that mean for the hierarchy they'd spent years climbing? One VP actually said out loud, "If we start promoting maintenance staff, what's the point of having a management track?" Colbert watched it unfold from his office, unsurprised but still stung. He'd expected resistance. What he hadn't expected was how quickly fear would calcify into opposition. That evening, he found John in the loading dock and said the words John had been bracing for. "Mansfield's coming for us." John just nodded. He'd seen this movie before. Monday morning, Colbert walked into the French aerospace negotiation with John trailing quietly behind him in business casual, not quite executive armor, still visibly caught between worlds. The conference room had the tension of a poker table with millions on the line, because there were. $200 million, a partnership that would reshape the company's global footprint. The French delegation sat across the polished table, their translator, a crisp woman from an agency Colbert had used for 5 years, methodically working through technical specifications. Then the deal began to die. John noticed it first, a subtle shift in the French CEO's face, a pause that lasted too long. The translator had just rendered load-bearing stress tolerance parameters as something that fundamentally changed the engineering requirements, wrong by a factor that would cost the French company millions. John sat in the corner for another 30 seconds, watching the misunderstanding calcify. Then he did something that made Colbert's breath catch. He leaned forward slightly and spoke in perfect, fluent French. "Pardonnez-moi, there's a translation issue." The room went silent. The French CEO's eyes snapped to John. Colbert felt Mansfield, sitting 3 seats down, actually stop breathing. John corrected the technical terminology, clarified the specifications, and in 90 seconds saved a deal that was collapsing in real time. The French aerospace executives nodded in relief. The CFO of the aerospace company actually smiled. The deal was back on. Colbert felt elation for exactly 6 hours. Then Mansfield requested an emergency board meeting, his face dark with something beyond anger, something closer to calculation. "We need to discuss what happens when a maintenance worker speaks in executive negotiations," Mansfield said coldly. The battle lines had just been drawn. The boardroom felt smaller than it should have, 23 people. Mansfield at the head of the table with his allies flanked like soldiers. John sitting beside Colbert, still in business casual, looking like he was about to be executed. "Organizational structure and protocol," Mansfield began, his voice honey-smooth and lethal. "The CEO has appointed someone without executive experience, without formal training, to speak on behalf of this company in critical negotiations. I'm simply asking, where are his qualifications?" He said his like it was a slur. John's hands didn't shake. He stood up and opened a folder he'd prepared, not from ego, but from 8 years of watching. Financial reports showing 3 failed negotiations in the past 5 years, all due to translation errors. Costs $4.2 million. Then he pulled out his Georgetown transcript, Dean's List, Rhodes Scholar nominee, thesis on cross-cultural negotiation. "I didn't fail to qualify," John said, and the room went absolutely still. "I chose something else. I chose my family, and for 8 years I've been studying, preparing, waiting for someone to be ready to see what I could offer instead of waiting for me to look the part." He paused, let it land. Being ready and being seen as ready aren't the same thing, but they should be. Colbert stood. Effective immediately, John Phillips is appointed Vice President of Global Cultural Integration. Mansfield's face went white. The board voted 18-5 in favor. The ground floor leadership program launched 6 weeks later, and the response nearly broke the building's application servers. 87 employees submitted applications in the first week alone. The maintenance worker who'd coded the security system became lead architect on the IT innovation team. Sophia from the cafeteria restructured their entire supply chain and cut operational costs by 38%. David, the poet, he was now heading internal communications strategy. The loading dock optimizer became director of logistics. But the real magic happened in the mentorship rooms. John paired rising talent with executives who actually understood that brilliance wasn't a credential, it was a choice. He created tuition assistance programs that sent employees back to finish degrees, back to pursue certifications, back to becoming the versions of themselves they'd put on hold. Within 3 months, 12 people had advanced to positions they'd never been allowed to see as possible. The invitations started coming. A major business conference wanted John to keynote on inclusive leadership, then another. Companies began calling, asking how to replicate the model. McKinsey published a case study. Fortune ran a feature titled "The Janitor Who Rewrote Corporate Culture." But John barely noticed the attention. He was too busy in those mentorship rooms, watching people's faces light up when someone finally said, "I see you. I believe in what you can do." He was finally doing what he'd always been built for. The auditorium held 3,000 people, and he could see them from backstage. Marcus Jr. in the 3rd row, his 6th grade teacher's posture straight with pride. Angela in her white nursing uniform, tears already streaming before he'd said a word. Keisha in her new law school blazer, looking at her brother like he was still the man who held their family together when everything fell apart. He walked to center stage and didn't use notes. "Brilliance doesn't have a dress code," he said, and the room went silent. "Talent doesn't need permission, and leadership can come from anywhere if you're willing to look." He told them about Georgetown, about the choice, about 8 years of invisible study, about Marcus and his security code, about Sophia's MBA collecting dust in a cafeteria, about David's published poetry nobody knew existed. He told them the real story, not a fairy tale, but a call to action. How many geniuses are working in your building right now that you've never seen? After the speech, a young black woman pushed through the crowd, her eyes red, her voice shaking. "I'm a custodian. I speak 4 languages. I've been waiting for someone to see me." John took her hand. "What's your name?" "Amara." He pulled out his card and pressed it in her palm. "Call me. Let's talk about what's possible." Back in his office weeks later, John stood before his wall and looked at the framed blue maintenance uniform hanging beside his executive degree. Not erased, not forgotten, just transformed. Just like him. Here's what I learned. Your circumstances don't determine your capacity. Your uniform doesn't define
Your value. And the people who couldn't see you yesterday, that's not a reflection of what you are, it's a reflection of what they were willing to look at. Stop waiting for the world to be ready for you. Start being ready for yourself. Study when nobody's watching. Build skills in the margins. Document your brilliance, even if nobody's asking for it yet. Because somewhere, there's a Colbert walking through your building looking for the thing that will change everything. But more importantly, be the person who sees others. Be the one who looks past the uniform, past the title, past the things that make people easy to ignore. Because genius is everywhere. It's just waiting to be seen. And that starts with you. If this story moved you to recognize someone in your life who's been invisible, I need you to please subscribe, like, share, and comment where you're watching from. Let's build a community that actually sees each other. I love you so much and really appreciate you.